Thank you, Scott. Thank you very much, everyone. Somebody was worried that this is a little bit too small and the text might be hard for you to read because we're not doing the whole screen. This is the only text in the whole presentation, so you don't have to worry about it. The idea about this is that I wanted to take a common object. We either all own a car, at the very least I suspect we've all been in a car at some stage, or at the very, very least we've all seen a car. Literally, we have to dodge them to get into this building. By using a common object, it just means I can communicate some concepts to you in a really, really simple manner. And also it's actually, I mean, cars are fairly common objects in games as well, so it's relevant in that regard. I've been working in VR and AR for quite some time, and I even wrote a book on the subject. And what I've discovered is that this field is changing so quickly that it's really hard to keep up. Like within a few weeks of the book basically being signed off and published and everything like that, I'm like, I want to change that and I want to update that. So this in some ways is a little bit of an update of some of the thoughts that I've had. Where I was originally was that VR is all about immersion because we are placing somebody into an environment. If I put up the best PlayStation or Xbox game on this screen right now and we're playing it with our controllers, essentially what we're doing is it feels like we're stuck looking through a window. And the game is all the kids outside having fun while we're stuck inside and we can't go out to play. Whereas VR allows us to actually go, awesome, we are inside everything. So that's where the importance of immersion is. And one of the quick things I will point out is that what I've found is that there's quite a few people working on VR who are just kind of not getting that. I'm finding a lot of VR experiences where they've got head-locked stereo sound. Now, if I'm standing in a rainstorm, there is rain all around me. So we'll call it raindrop A here, raindrop B here, but we've also got raindrop C and D. My relationship to those raindrops changes dramatically when I turn my head. If you've got stereo rain, bam, you have immediately undermined your entire concept of providing me with a virtual environment. So that's one of the aspects, but one of the other ones is scale, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So, this is a representation of my car. My actual car is white, not green. It has slightly different wheels. Mine has an engine in it. But the concept is the same. I'm using a very, very standard hatchback car, nothing surprising about it, nothing particularly unusual about it. And what we're going to do is we're going to expose it a piece at a time so that I can explain to you kind of why a car is important, especially when we're talking VR and AR. And I can do this by walking down here because this screen is a little bit small, so it's not quite life-size, but we can see here that a car is a large object in relation to me. If a car was in a video game, it's an object on a screen that's about that big, and you can quite often get away with having a single sound attached to that car, and the car moves around and it makes noise. But as soon as we scale this thing up, there are immediately 2 points about this. If I'm over here, the prominent sound I'm going to hear is the engine, which the car's idling, let's assume that. So I'm hearing the engine. But in VR, because of the scale and quite often because of the freedom, I can go, yeah, okay, engine, that's fine. I'm going to come down here. And not just come down to the back end of the car, but I'm actually going to get down on my hands and knees and I'm going to put my head right down with the exhaust pipe. Knowing that they get really, really hot, I'm going to be really, really careful. Yes, I have melted microphone covers getting them too close to exhaust pipes. But this is the point. This car already is now, at the very least, 2 sound emitters. Because I can get close up to this exhaust pipe. And the thing about the exhaust pipe is not just that it should be 1 extra sound. If I'm standing here and the exhaust pipe's down there, I'm going to get 1 type of sound. As I lean down onto my hands and knees and put my ears right near it, it's not just that sound gets louder. What I'm hearing actually changes. It's the difference between a waterfall. If you're at a waterfall and it's 500 meters away, it's just a very, very generic white noise. But as you get closer to it and closer to it, the resolution, in the same way that the visual resolution of the waterfall changes, the sonic resolution changes as well. There's more detail. You can get up to the point where you can practically see the pixels of the audio. So as I get my ear down near the exhaust pipe, I'm hearing the popping and cracking and I can hear what's going on inside the engine. Whereas if I'm this far away from it, it's just a general low hum. So already what we've got here is our car has now been split in two. Focusing on the exhaust pipe, getting close to the exhaust pipe, what we need to do is we need to understand that there is a difference in resolution. And as I say, that resolution is not just it's louder or maybe a filter or whatever. I would suggest and recommend in a lot of cases you need to have like an LOD, sort of like 2 or 3 different sounds that you're cross-fading between depending on where I am. Now the engine is the next thing. If we sort of pull the engine out a little bit, a standard car engine is a fairly large, depending on what size car engine is, a fairly large object. But it's not, again, an engine is not a single sound source. Any of you who own a car, I really, really recommend you do this. Find your car, switch it on, let it idle, open the bonnet up, and just lean around. Move your head around, carefully obviously. Move your head around, to the side, move around to the front, lean over there. You've got a fan belt going here, you've got pistons going here. The average car engine is made up, it is a complex sound made up of dozens of aspects. So again, car game, the car's this big on the television screen, then fine. But if this is a VR game where I can walk over and I can throw open the bonnet and part of the game is to find out what's wrong with the car, it's like, oh, is it fan belt? No, that sounds okay. Oh, this thing's rattling over here. It might be that. And what have we got over here? We've got this thing buzzing. So the level of detail is directly relative to the scale that we allow ourselves to deal with. And in VR, sometimes the scale can be huge. So we look at the individual engine, and I will tell you, there's pistons going up and down, but the sound of the pistons going up and down is going to be very different if we're down here lying underneath the engine. Maybe we're doing some mechanical work, or it's a racing simulation game and you've got to tune the engine, and so you're up top playing around with the things up top. As I said, there's a whole bunch of components that go together to create essentially the gestalt entity that is the engine. Now, I'll pause for a second. I'm not suggesting you need to always go to this level of detail. It depends entirely upon what the experience is. But this is an example, this is a vehicle to discuss the sorts of things we can do. And I'll give you a quick practical example. And if anybody's interested in this, I'm actually doing a post-mortem on this game on the Friday. It's the very last session on Friday for anybody who's still awake. A game I worked on which was a sailing game. And I'm not going to go into all the details, but one of the things that I had was you are sitting in the boat, you cannot move, which for me is a beautifully curated experience. I can craft that entire experience because I know you're not walking away, you're in the boat. It was on Vive, which means you can lean this way and that way, etc., relative to the boat, and you've got the boom coming by, but you could actually lean right down to the water. So I had the sounds of the water rushing past the boat while the boat's moving, and I had different ones depending on the speed of the boat, so those sounds would change. But it was generally just that sort of general sort of white noisy sort of sound. But if you leaned down, as you got closer, it would fade up a more bubbling, gurgling texture sound. So again, what I've given you is this kind of level of detail idea of as you get closer to that sound source, it's a whole different sound. And we can do this with all sorts of things. It'll be up to you per project, per thing, how important the thing is, what sort of relationship it needs to have with the audience. But this is all relevant to the scale. All right, so here's a really, really, really interesting one. Okay, it's a VR game. It's a driving game. Fantastic. So we're driving along and we've got our interior of the car, and we'll get to the interior in a second, but before we get to the interior of the car, we're going to open the window. Okay, so what's the ramifications of opening the window in VR? There's one thing in VR that it's kind of like, okay, so I'm driving and the window opens. So now what we've got is we've got our enclosed box, and the sound of our enclosed box has just been breached. We've just opened the window. So the general sound of the engine, we've got a direct sound source coming through, so it's not all coming through the sound dampening within the car. We've opened the window, and now we've got the sound of wind going past. And also, if we're driving anywhere where there's any objects, we've got this of trees or telegraph poles or whatever going past. So you've got all of that. But it's VR. I can stick my whole head out the window. Now, all of a sudden, with my head out the window, everything's changed. My entire perception of the car engine is external, right? I'm not getting any sounds traveling through the body of the car, but moreover, I've now got the sound of wind rushing past my head. And the thing I was telling you about before about turning your head, well, I've now got wind coming about my head in all different directions, and I can do all this. So now, it's a single wind sound is not going to seem realistic. It's not going to seem immersive. You need to have multiple emitters that basically allow me to have my head inside a volume of sound. So opening the window in VR is really, really significant. So if you're working on a project and somebody sort of says, oh yeah, it's a racing game, it's in VR, and we're going to open the window, you need to very quickly put your hand up and go, just letting you know, that's going to have a pretty big impact. And they're like, well, can't you just change the sound to wind? No. And that is actually part of what we need to do is really advocate for, the more we understand about the impacts of things, the more we can actually communicate that with our teams. So when somebody goes, oh, we just want to open the window because we think that'd be cool, and you can just add a wind sound, it's like, yeah, you're going to need to give me a couple of extra weeks. And they're like, what? And now you can explain why, because of all of those elements. So there's a lot, there can be a really big impact from such a simple thing as saying, I want to open the window. Interior. Let's mask that out, except for a couple of areas. Hey, look, 4 speakers. I think it's actually got some more speakers somewhere else, but those were the easy ones. Do we have, like, you know, GTA style, do we have an in-game radio playing? If so, speakers there, speakers down here. If I'm leaning across, you know, the speaker's getting louder, the music, etc., etc. Again, these are all options. I'm not saying you have to do these things, but if you're trying to create... The problem about something like a car, whilst it's the perfect thing for this discussion today, it's also a huge issue because every single person who might be using your experience knows what a car sounds like. They know what the experience is like. They know that when they're in their car, either they're driving or somebody else is driving and they're in their car, they know there's a speaker down there and there's a little speaker over there and the speaker. So if I lean across to the glove box, you know, I lean across to the glove box, my perception of the sounds coming out of these speakers should get softer, the ones out of there should get louder. If this is a game or an experience where there might be a passenger, then the passenger going there should muffle the door speaker. Theoretically, you could even go to crazy levels and go, well, you know, if I put my hand over where the speaker is in VR, if I put my hand over a sound source that we know in the real world is a sound source, does it muffle that speaker? I'll get to it in a second, but down the bottom there's like a coin tray that's rattling. If I put my hand down there, does it stop it rattling? Do we want that level of interaction? So there are so many little things, and the inside of the car basically has far more. The more I did this, I started going, oh wow, okay, the inside's got lots of stuff. Here's the glove box. And we know what the glove box is, and we know, okay, well, if you can open the glove box, it's there might be the sound for it going in the little hydraulic thing of it opening. But even if the glove box is just like a flat texture, you never interact with the glove box. That doesn't mean that we as audio people can't interact with the glove box. Now, here's where we take a step aside, and basically one of the key things that we need to do as audio folk is obviously we're making audio, but the reason why we're making audio is because we are here to support the narrative. So many objects can take on the importance of a character. A best example for me is, as far as I'm concerned, the lead character in Star Trek, not the absolute latest one, but prior to that, the lead character in Star Trek is the USS Enterprise. The ship is the lead character. So if this is our, okay, let's just say this is a transformery thing. So this is kind of like Bumblebee's little sister, right? And so Bumblebee's little sister is a little bit quirky and everything like that. And one of the things is that Bumblebee's little sister never opens her glove box. That's private. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean, she just doesn't do that, right? But what we want to do to give her a little bit of character is there's always something bumping around in the glove box. Every time you turn a corner, there's something slide, clunk, slide, clunk, slide, clunk that's in the glove box that's moving around. So we've all of a sudden made a glove box that doesn't even exist. There are no assets for it. It doesn't open up. You will never see anything in there. But all of a sudden, this can be something that's really intriguing and add a whole new element to the story. Because it's like, what on earth is in the glove box? And it's like, she never talks about the glove box. So all of a sudden, it's like the player's going to be pulling their hair out, going, I want to know what's in the glove box. And I mean, that's the sort of thing that I would actually just add initially without even asking. And then basically have the designers going, what's the clunk with the glove box? Like, there's something in the glove box. It's easy to show rather than tell. And then they'd be like, what? And it's like, it's the sort of thing that's either going to work or not. And if it works, they're going to go, okay. And it's like, look, she's got something in the glove box. It's a secret. And I've just given you a whole new quest for the sequel game. Find out what's in the glove box. But this is the point. There's difference between, character objects are really important. The difference between, I'm in a game, I'm in an FPS game, and I go through 6 doors. They all just have the normal door opening and door closing sound. I go through the 7th door, and it's got a really, really rusty, creaky sound that sounds like it's going to jam or break. We've drawn attention to that door for a reason. We can do the same sort of thing with our VR interiors. So this is what I was talking about before, is that we've got the gear stick that you can see down there, and actually just behind the gear stick, it's not really very, very clear, that is actually another little box for coins and stuff. So again, are there coins in the coin box? They rattle sometimes, and as I was saying, maybe you put your hand on the coin box and it stops rattling. But even things like the gear stick, maybe it is a VR game, and let's say we've got gloves or whatever, or you're using the controllers and a hand comes down and is moving the gear stick. Do we want it to be a purely realistic sound of the gear stick? Are we trying to simulate reality, or are we trying to tell a story? My thought is, if we're trying to tell a story, then again, it gives us agency to add a little bit more character to that gear stick. Again, if Bumblebee's little sister, maybe third gear kind of grinds a little bit because, somebody ran into her years ago and it never got fixed. It's kind of like that sort of hip problem sort of stuff. It's kind of a limp, but not a limp. But again, we can put character into ordinary everyday or seemingly ordinary everyday actions. But it's still a case of when we lean closer to the coins, are they louder? If we put our hands on them, do they stop rattling? Maybe, if I move the gear stick around a little bit, clunk, 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 it goes into gear more easily, so I don't get that rattling. There's so many things that can be done with sound to tell micro story. In the same way that many games will have people writing like little quests and stuff like that, you can bring a lot of character to various aspects and various objects in the game, depending on how you approach it. And I'm not saying just go crazy. It's always best to consult with your team, but your team may not even be aware that this is possible. They're like, oh, wow, we didn't even think of this. We didn't think we could do that sort of stuff. And sometimes, that's why I'm saying sometimes you might be, you can just show it off by doing it. And if they don't like it, you pull it out. But if they're like, oh, well, this is cool. What's with the glove box thing? And you tell them the little story about there's something hidden in the glove box. And you might find that they're like, that's a cool idea. We really like that. Leave the glove box clunk in. Wind vents, air conditioning ducts, whatever you want to call them. Again, same sort of thing. Do they make any noise at all? Are they always considered off? Or is it an opportunity to enhance the sense of speed? Because, maybe the user, the audience, the player can't control them or change them, but there would be a default setting. Now, you could just say, oh, their default setting is off, they're closed, there's no sound there. Or what you could basically have is their default setting is just, the open vent to the outside air. No air conditioning, no heating or anything like that. It's just a straight flow through to the outside intakes. Which means this car, when it's all sort of sealed up, and a lot of modern cars are really pretty quiet when they're all sealed up, and you're going, and it's like, yeah, okay, the engine's thrashing away, but I'm not really getting that sense of I'm going fast. There's a little bit less of that impact. And then you could just basically go, there's just a subtle sort of wind sound that increases in intensity or pitch or whatever, layers, etc., as the car's going faster and faster. Again, whether you want to go, you could take it to extremes, and with Bumblebee's little sister, maybe she wheezes when she works too hard. And so one of the vents basically has got this little bit of a sort of a whistly sort of sound. And when she's grumpy at you, they kind of like cough at you or something like that. Maybe that's a way of communicating. I'm not suggesting again that these are must-haves. But my point is you can see already that our interior of this car has got so much potential. There's so much that we can do just with the interior of a car that up until now in most games, you know, and here's all the other bits and pieces. This weird little thing down here, believe it or not, is actually the handbrake. This is a little digital one. That slides open and closed, or doesn't. As I said, the handle on the glove box, the gear stick as well and its controls, all the controls for the air conditioning, the radio, blah, 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 the horn, the electric mirrors on the side. Do these things operate? Do they need to operate? Do you want them to operate because they might add more character? So it's not just the addition of the sounds, it's we are building up an environment in the same way that we would look at something and go, I want trees over there, and I want that swamp to have frogs in it because that'll be really nice and luscious and it'll be really good and they'll be louder when it rains, etc. And at night time the birds go to sleep and all the crickets come out. We're building an environment. And, well, sorry, the game artists and level designers are building an environment. Generally what our job is to bring the environment to life. That's one of the key things we do. We take things that otherwise are often just static objects or just things that even things sometimes that are animated. You know, you see somebody who's done a really awesome animation of a dragon, and I've worked on projects like this where somebody's gone, yeah, we really, really like the dragon, it's looking really, really cool, you know, it just doesn't quite have that thing. And I'm like, hang on, pop in the sound, and everybody's like, that's the thing. The difference between any creature, character, or really sort of effective giant, you know, 10-legged walker thing that's supposed to come over here and scare Damien. You know, if it's not making noise, it's not completely ineffectual, but it has so much less impact. So all of these things are potential impact and should be added into the overall consideration of what it is we're doing and how we're doing it. So the point about car is that the car is the perfect example of an object we know and we understand. That's a really good first place for us to start. But even better than that, I would suggest that everybody in this room can get access to a car, to examine it, to think about it. It's not like a dragon where I'm sitting there going, does a dragon snore? You know, what does it sound like when a dragon scratches her butt? I mean, you know, is it claw on scales, or does she get the claw under the scales? It's a bit, oh, that really feels good, you know. And so so those sorts of details are important. But my point is that those are a little bit more subjective, etc. We can all look at a car. Anybody in here who wants to try this out can immediately do some research and work out what stuff do I need. What stuff can I maybe play with and be a little bit sort of poetic with? What stuff is going to be overkill? Because you can try it out in the game or whatever, and then you can basically get in your car and go, well, I'm going to take everything out of the glove box and put one thing in there. Drive around and see if it goes clunk, 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 how much it goes clunk. I'm going over, you know, speed humps and stuff, and what sort of sound does it make? And then you can decide, I'm really going to amp this up and make it, dial it up to 15, because for our product right now, that's what we need. So I guess the subtext of this session is a suggestion that, not just for VR and AR, but it certainly helps in those, that using a common real-world object as your point of reference can sometimes be really, really good because it allows you to do research really, really easily. It allows you to mock things up because you literally could do something at work, you could take it home, you could show your husband or wife, your kids, your spouse, your partner, and go, so this is kind of a mock-up of our car. What do you think? That sounds exactly like our car. Cool, that's a good place to start. Or no, the coin tray needs to rattle a whole bunch more. So, this has been a short, sharp, quick and dirty info dump of, in some ways, not necessarily techniques, but just a mode of thinking, an approach where, for VR specifically, scale matters. And I'll leave it with one final example of If we all had, and VR and AR works in the same way, to just get this point across, if we all had AR glasses on right now, and I basically, made sure that there was a little AR robot that's walking across the table here, and he's this big, and then jumps down onto there, and we hear the clunk, and then jumps down and walks along a little bit more, but then grows till the head of the robot is right up in the ceiling. Me walking down here now, the little robot that was up there, one sound source for the whole robot is appropriate. The robot here now, if I'm walking along next to the robot, I want to hear the servos in the ankles, in the knees, in the hips, in the waist. I want to be able to lean across and go, yeah, you need to get your waist tuned because there's kind of a grindy rattle when you turn your waist and all that sort of stuff. Because the robot is now so big that my point of reference to the robot is I can discern all of the different areas, whereas when it's this big, a single sound source is likely enough. So just keep that in mind with VR and AR, that it's not just immersion, and immersion is really important, but scale will impact how you need to approach your projects in a really big way. And by thinking in a common sort of object, it will help you to sort of work your way through the potential challenges that you may have there. And that gives us a couple of minutes for a couple of questions if we want. Thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah. Have you started using any ray-traced audio in any of your development for doing occlusion or reverb-related stuff?
No, and I'll tell you why. It's expensive, and we don't need it. At least, let me qualify that a little bit. We don't really need it, at least not at this stage, because the reality is people are still getting used to VR and AR, and the biggest point is that if I'm outside in the open air and I walk over into that concrete shed over there, there's one key thing I need. If that's the line there, when I cross the line, I need a point of difference. For most of our audiences, they are not going to understand and appreciate if that reverb is 100% accurate for that space, as long as reverb is on and off. Now, I would take it one step further. If it was an important part of the game or the project, what I would like to see is, if I'm in the center, I get even reflections everywhere. When I'm close to a wall, I will get one wall closer to the others. I would have probably those two states. So obviously closer to that wall, that wall, that wall, or that wall. But I'd basically have, I'm away from the wall when I cross sort of, 25% away. So I get the middle reverb, or I'm close to a wall, because then I get that really nice proximity effect of I am near something close. But ray tracing, all this sort of stuff, I'm not saying we shouldn't have it. I'm saying right at the moment, I think there are far more important priorities than worrying about completely accurate reflections and stuff.
Thank you.
No worries.
Thanks very much for the talk, very eye-opening. I'm curious, if you have a sound outside the car, say the engine sound, right? Obviously it's going to sound different if you're outside than if you step inside the car, it'll be occluded somewhat. Mm-hmm. How would you handle a sound like on the window itself that kind of is in between multiple spaces? You can hear it from multiple perspectives at the same time.
I would cover my car with a whole bunch of microphones and I'd record all those different perspectives. Whether I use those actual recordings or not, what those do is they give me points of reference that I can then go off and go, actually, I don't need to have 10 different layers playing at once. I can have my indoor one, my outdoor one, and the one near the window, I would have the one near the window basically on kind of like a rail, so it sounds close to the window because it's sort of the closest point. If you stick your head out the window, it kind of swivels around a little bit closer towards the engine, and I might filter it if I could achieve the effect that I wanted with filters. If I couldn't, then I'd just have the different recordings and play those in the different places. Because yes, I talked about the engine and the exhaust. They were the two examples, but you'd also get a different sound source for each of the tires. You'd get a different sound. I recorded some stuff for Mercedes, and I literally had 3 microphones in the engine bay, 1 on the exhaust pipe, 1 halfway down each side of the car. And if you look at the way Hollywood do it, they go even further than that.
Thank you.
No worries. Round up, can we have one more question? No? I'm getting a shake of the head at the back.
Give the wrap-up room. You can do a wrap-up.
Yeah, so I'll go into I'll go outside, and if anybody's got any questions, you can ask those questions there. But the people in red, they're really important, and if I go further, they just come up on the stage and drag me off. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it.